Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hi, it's Zoe, your friendly neighborhood Canadian-Australian leadership expert. And I want to tell you a little bit about our guest today. He's quite extraordinary. His name is Gordon Graham. He has written a memoir on his life and experience in his role as an IT professional at a public electricity utility organization, try saying that quickly, in the U.S. And it was a long story about good-intentioned people trying to do the right thing with a challenging leader in a difficult and challenging system. So the upshot is, after a very long time, he was wrongfully dismissed, took them to court, and won his case. So the memoir takes us back to the starting point where he had been an IT professional for a long time, had some ideas about how to improve the business situation and move forward, basically. And he made a recommendation to the general manager, and things went south after that. The general manager saw it as a threat, and he became public enemy number one, and then spent a lot of his career trying to isolate himself from that situation and from the ire of this manager. Maybe you can relate. Maybe you have been in a particular situation where you've been ostracized. You've been trying to improve things, trying to make things better, and then all of a sudden you find yourself fighting for your job, trying to battle against being ostracized and alienated. Well, if that's been you, please buckle up with a cup of tea and settle in. This is a fascinating story of how one speaks truth to power and navigates the challenges of having a sociopath at the helm, and what we can do when we do find ourselves face to face with someone like that. Let's do it. Well, all the way from Wenatchee Valley in Central Washington, welcome to the show, Gordon Graham.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
What an extraordinary tale you tell in your memoir, The Intrepid Brotherhood, Public Power, Corruption, and Whistleblowing in the Pacific Northwest, which is a long tagline. And yet the book does cover all these interesting twists and turns of a very difficult period of your life. So I know the book has been 10 years in the making. What made you decide to write the book?
I think it was more a feeling of unfulfilled purpose than anything else. I had put it off, even though I was urged by family, friends, neighbors, anybody that had heard the story, to put it down on paper, so to speak. I had pretty much resigned myself to the realization that I wasn't really motivated to do it. I probably would not accomplish that. And then someone said to me, kind of in a life coach situation, well, how are you going to feel when you know you don't have enough time left to do it? If you're in that situation, how are you going to feel that you have not gotten this accomplished? And so I thought about that for a while and finally realized, it really does need to be told. There are lessons in here that I believe anyway, people can benefit from. And so I decided to look into the possibility of getting it recorded, getting it written down, made the decision that it was probably going to take me too long, or longer than I wanted, to do it all on my own. So I found a ghostwriting resource. And then after that, once we had a manuscript done, a self-publishing company, and it came to fruition. It's done. It was released on January 18th and has received good reviews so far. I'd like to see the sales pick up a bit, but I think every author's probably that way.
Of course. So it is the story of whistleblowing, of how you experienced a long period of difficult conditions in your workplace to the final outcome, or the eventual outcome of saying enough is enough. I've got to do something about this. For the listeners, can you just give us a brief timeline of the episode? I don't know if it's the right word, the experience, I guess. And then we'll start to dive into some of the issues that I want to explore from a leadership point of view.
I think probably by the time that the trial was wrapped up, after I came back and filed a claim against the utility for wrongful termination, and it finally was put in front of a jury in 2009. By that time, it had been probably 20 years in the making, because the central villain, if you want to characterize him that way, had come to the utility in the early 1990s, somewhere around 1991, I think, and had gone through several different positions in his climb to the ultimate CEO, general manager position. So, yeah, almost 18, 20 years was the timeline, or the entire time for the story or the storyline.
It doesn't start off as a villainous experience necessarily. Let me give you my impression of the story, and then we can dive into it if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine.
So I was reading the story, and it's a tale of an aspirational young professional, aka you, who wants to make a difference in the workplace and comes up against a person who has their own ambitions and their own methodology, which you make allusions to Sun Tzu and the sort of command and control and everyone's an enemy and we must conquer all method of management, and manages to hoodwink people or convince them to make him CEO of the organization. In the meantime, you have, with all due integrity and aspiration, wanted to make a difference in the workplace and improve it. And that was your sole intention. And there's a moment, and I want to talk about this moment, where he becomes your enemy and doesn't come back from that, really. You don't come back from that. You become his enemy, and he sets out to marginalize you and discredit you, it seems to me, over the 20 years. And he recruits other people in his circle to do the same. So it's like a gradual, I don't know how you managed to put up with that kind of experience for so long. It seems that would be just incredibly gut-wrenching to do that. Have I captured the essence of the story in your view at this point?
Yes, I think that's a pretty accurate description. There's some nuances or clarifications with regard to the timeline, but everything that you have said is in the book, and I think it becomes clear to people that myself, my department, especially those young leaders who worked for me, that I had as very capable subordinates, we were dedicated to trying to get everyone who was under our purview or influence to succeed in the organization, to help them achieve what they wanted to, and thereby help the organization succeed also. Whereas it seemed like this manager, the one who had become the general manager, wasn't concerned about the welfare and success of anyone in the organization unless it served him. And so that was his, I guess, management ethic and what he imposed on other people. Otherwise, he tried to make sure that they weren't there anymore, either voluntarily or through some circumstance that he would create.
It's very interesting the way that you describe his management style. So you said that he liked to create drama to then appear as the person who comes to save the day. So in my knowledge background, that's activating the drama triangle. So he sets up chaos and then comes across as the hero to save it. And that's sort of how he managed to get himself promoted through the ranks. It's a classic story, in some ways classic, of a psychopath, a functional psychopath who uses others without much empathy to get to the top of the power tree. And once at the top of the power tree, can't actually deliver on what's expected of a good leader. And that's sort of eventually he finds himself out of the organization, but it takes a long time. I want to come back to the incident as you describe it, the beer immunity conversation. So this is in the late 90s. And we should also set the scene too, that this commencement of the conflict, I guess. It was in the late 90s, and your aspirations were to be, as head of information technology, head of IT in the organization, was to step up the position of IT to be a strategic part of the organization, not just a service level piece of it. And so the concept of a chief information officer hadn't really gotten traction yet in the corporate world. And so this was kind of a novel new idea. And this is the thing that you wanted to take to the person in charge, aka the villain, if you like. And it was the late 90s, and the beer immunity. I love this story. So could you explain what is the beer immunity and what unfolded in that conversation?
Well, it was just the way that people at a certain level of management in the organization referred to the ability to approach the manager and ask to meet with him one-on-one in a social situation, or at least not in the workplace. So you could invite him out to drink, so to speak, or invite him to lunch or to dinner or whatever. It was just the idea that you could invite him with the hope that he would accept that appointment to just a one-on-one meeting where you could talk about concerns, express issues, things that you'd like to see resolved, things that you might be able to work on together, and anything that you said, the immunity portion of it related to the idea that anything you said could not and would not be held against you. And I suppose just reading my story, it's pretty obvious that as far as he was concerned, that immunity had definite limits. There were things that you didn't broach or didn't bring up. And that was definitely true in my case. I mean, the details are, I just asked him to meet for a while after work one afternoon. And we did that. And I told him, it's all explained in the book. Of course, you read it. But I told him that I was concerned that if we did not get information technology more integrated into the strategic planning process, that we would always be reactionary, and we would always be trying to carve up the resources that we had to try to meet the needs of everybody. The squeakiest wheel. And we would never be able to realize what the organization really wanted us to do. We would always be cast in an unfavorable light. We'd always be asking for more resources to meet those unmanaged or unplanned needs, those things that should have been actually part of the strategic planning process, but were left up to the whims of the rest of the organization. And that is not looked upon favorably in any company when you're always coming back with your hat in your hand saying that I can't meet these needs. We need to have more people, more equipment, more money, whatever it is. So I said, let's try to integrate that into the planning process, at the top level, at the highest level. So we know that what we are doing aligns with the strategy of the organization and the mission and vision, the critical success factors, everything we're trying to accomplish as a company. And I said, if we don't do that, there is a point where it will definitely affect the performance of this entire organization. And, I may be the scapegoat at that point. I imagine that I would be. All the finger pointing would come back to our department, but I'm trying to be proactive and avoid that. And I'm sure that you'd rather be in front of the commissioners telling them a success story of how you integrated this strategic resource into the planning function. And this is what we have accomplished by doing that. And I don't think he liked the idea that I was trying to counsel him on that. Just don't think he was very receptive. I think there's a fundamental lack in a lot of, you may not agree with this, but a lot of CEOs, general managers, people at that level, I don't think that type of leadership comes naturally to them. And I think one of the things that's missing at that level a lot of times is their own personal development program. I mean, they're quick to make sure that everybody else in the organization is focused on continuous improvement and has plans on how they will increase their own performance and that of the department that they manage. But a lot of general managers and CEOs are not held accountable for having their own improvement plans, and they just don't take the time to do it, or they don't think they have to. They're not held accountable by elected officials, boards of directors, shareholders, for for making themselves better, focusing on contemporary issues and how they can lead and manage better. It's like they've reached the pinnacle, they're in charge, and unfortunately in some cases it's my way or the highway, and they don't think about how they can be better. And it's kind of sad in some ways.
It's absolutely terrifying. And I agree with you that I don't think it's consistent across the board. The unsuccessful CEOs, unsuccessful organizations don't take the development of their CEOs seriously. And Cindy Wigglesworth says that the capacity of the organization is limited by the capacity of the leader. And so it's an imperative that the leader continue to evolve and develop self-awareness and invite feedback, invite critique, invite new ideas. Otherwise, as you say, they are blinkered and blinded to opportunities and to emerging trends that they otherwise would miss. I mean, as soon as you think you know everything, it's clear that you don't. And that's a paraphrase of old adages and quotes from Aristotle right through to modern times. So I'm well on board with you about that leaders need to continue to develop. And in fact, that's the whole rationale behind my own leadership development program for senior leaders like CEOs and general managers called Amplifiers. And that program attracts CEOs who know that they can be better, and they worry that they're missing pieces. And so they dive into this program looking for a sounding board, looking for new ways of thinking about issues and challenges and developing new skills. So it sounds like your villain didn't have that in place and had an arrogance of sorts. It's an arrogance sometimes born of fear, I reckon. I think you'd allude to that, fearful of not really knowing what they're doing, and they mask it a little bit. So here you are in the meeting with this man, and everything that you've suggested sounds completely reasonable to me. It's like, wow, that's a really constructive, proactive suggestion about integrating all this stuff and highlighting the opportunities as well as highlighting the possible travesties if you get it wrong. Why on earth would he react in such a negative way? And what you write in the book it came out at the end of the book where you say, this was my message. These are all the good things that can happen. These are the problems that don't happen. And all you think he heard was, you suck.
That's right. I didn't know how else to put that. But in a nutshell, I honestly think that's what he was thinking, or something very similar. He didn't want to hear that from me. I can let myself believe that he actually realized the credibility of the message, and that's where he should be going if he was a different leader, if he was somebody else, or for the benefit of the organization, he should have actually taken that seriously. But he wasn't about to allow himself to let me know that he recognized that. He actually, well, like I say, he took offense and got up and left, gave me an ultimatum. And from that point forward, my life there at work and at that organization was subject to his whims, and it was not pleasant.
What was the ultimatum?
I think he said, we need to perform or improve performance in the IT department or else. And he didn't come right out and say that we would be outsourced. And it wasn't until sometime later that we realized that was his ultimate objective. But that was the ultimatum. And he may have already had it in mind. It may have been there was nothing I could have said at that time to get him to take a different position or a different strategy. He may have already had that in mind. And I think that's the ultimatum that he gave me. And it really rang very, very hollow with me because of everything that we had done to implement service management improvement within the department and continuous improvement initiatives, try to mature our processes, try to get more people trained up on project management, offering more technical training, trying to do more with the resources that we had, establishing customer feedback mechanisms, all those things that I could bore you with. But we knew that we were managing the department well, but we were still open to observations that we needed to improve. I mean, positive, constructive observations. And he was completely unwilling to recognize anything that we had done as far as improvement from a performance perspective. He didn't want to sit down and talk about how we could improve. He just wanted to tell me that we weren't meeting expectations and we needed to improve. He didn't want to engage, because I actually tried to get him to do that on a number of occasions, and it wasn't in his plan. He didn't really want to salvage what we had or he had there at the organization, and to take advantage of the expertise, the knowledge, just the dedication of the people in our department. He had a plan, and he wanted to execute it.
It just sounds bizarre. It sounds a little bit like he was threatened by your savviness and implied critique, whether you meant it as a direct critique. I don't think you did, by the sounds of it, in terms of your original suggestion that they integrate IT from a strategic point of view, which sounds very sensible. And sometimes really smart, insightful, savvy suggestions can be taken as a threat because of the implied criticism of, you didn't think of this. Of course, it makes sense. Therefore, you're a stupid leader, which comes, when he interprets everything you say as you suck, and therefore you become a threat. And he works hard to minimize that threat by making you the fault of the problem instead of basically a systems update. So this incident is really fascinating from a leadership and influence point of view. So you've had many years to think about that moment and to think about how you might have done it differently. What I'm curious about is, knowing now what you do, I mean, hindsight is a wonderful thing. Having thought about influence and putting messages across, do you think there was a different way that you could have delivered the same message without making him an enemy?
The short answer is no, because I've run that over in my mind a million times, as you can well imagine. And I even talk about it a lot in the book. I mean, I had tried to get people's attention at the senior management level, my immediate supervisor at the level right below the general manager's office. I had tried, there were like 3 different people that occupied that position between the early 90s and when I was they finally found a way to try to get rid of me. And every one of them, I had sat down with them and pretty much made the same pitch. Let's talk about how we can manage IT better based on the identified requirements and tactical initiatives that come out of the strategic plan. To me, it was just common sense. And as I observed in the book, I don't think I ever saw a flicker of recognition in any of them. I didn't get any support for what I wanted to do. So there was that attempt to engage people at that level to, I guess, assist in the initiative and then try to help me make the case to a higher level and eventually get my department integrated into the planning of the organization. I also tried to get the attention of one or more of the elected officials, the commissioners. Couldn't get them to recognize. And in all fairness, these are orchardists and farmers, and some of them are retired educators, but I really don't think any of them can be expected to have a working knowledge of strategic planning and the resource management that's necessary to really take advantage of things like technology and strategic things like that. But I tried to get them educated on it a little bit and to express some support for trying to move my initiative forward. I couldn't get them help or to engage. I tried some of my peers, director level people from other departments to recognize and support what we were trying to do, and really got not much, if any, help from that level either. So I think I had exhausted pretty much all the resources internally that I could to try to help get the manager's attention. And by the time I sat down with him, it was pretty much going to be up to he and I to get this done, and pretty much up to me to turn his head or to get him to realize that we needed to give this some consideration. So I don't think I could have or would have done anything differently if I wanted to achieve the same thing. Now, recognizing what his management style was like, I could have, like a lot of people do, I could have checked out mentally and just gone to work and put in my time. And
yeah.
But the thing that I realized, I had, as I mentioned in the book, I had talked to a number of my peers across the country who had run into similar situations, and some of them had actually checked out. They were miserable and bitter. All they could do was complain about life and work, and I didn't want to do that. So I asked myself, well, is this what you want to do? Do you want to just submit? Do you want to just accept that things are as they are, and whatever happens, happens, and just try to make the best of your own situation without trying to improve the organization and without trying to maximize the potential of the people that work for you? And there's just absolutely no way I could do that. I couldn't put myself in that frame of mind. So that's when we dedicated ourselves internally in the IT department to be the best that we absolutely could. And that's when we established our performance improvement initiatives and concentrated on trying to be the best we could in this bubble that really wasn't a great situation for anybody. That's why I came up with the term, the name for the book, the Brotherhood, because there were so many department heads and other people in the organization that suffered his wrath, and they checked out either mentally or physically. A lot of them did. Some of them stood up to him, and he was successful in finding a way to send them down the road. But that's where I was at. I just decided that we were going to try to be the best that we could be, and in the face of that, for lack of a better term, persecution.
Mm. It's kind of a depressing tale as well as an inspiring tale. And I think a lot of listeners will have found themselves in similar situations where they feel like they're the lone voice or a small pocket of a voice trying to change a system that seems unchangeable, and a system that's unchangeable and a leader that's intractable and for some unknown reason seems to have got everybody else with power in their thrall. And when leaders talk to me about their particular situations, it comes down to the choices that you've just described. It's either you either check out and just put your head down and just do your job and endure, or you band together and make the best of it as much as you can and create a bubble within this more difficult situation. Or the third option is you go somewhere else, you leave and you strike out on your own, or you remove yourself from the difficult, challenging situation. From a leadership point of view, I guess that the inspiring part about it is that it took a while and things eventually did change. And it took people standing up to it. So you have a colleague, Mark, who basically acted as a whistleblower and called out some of this behavior you did all along and kept resisting throughout. And then when they finally acted against you and made you redundant, you took them to task for that. Well, took them to court, essentially, for wrongful dismissal. And that got a lot of publicity onto the situation. What is your advice to people who find themselves, as you did, trying to change a situation, trying to change a system, trying to make positive recommendations, and finding not just roadblocks, but active adversaries? What would be your suggestion to them?
I hate to be redundant, but basically the same things I just covered. The first thing I would, and I hope people who avail themselves of the opportunity to read this book, I hope one thing that they'll take away from it is that everybody at every level in any kind of organization needs to be vigilant about how their organization is being managed, and if it is maintaining the focus on the mission, the established and published mission. Also, if they are sincere about being compliant with policies, procedures, administrative code, state law, federal requirements, whatever. One thing about this general manager was, I think I mentioned before that his attitude was rules for thee and not for me. So our organization spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars training our entire workforce on things that the Washington Administrative Code required, and we had policies and procedures that fit each one of those administrative codes because it was required. They were all law. It was law. We had to have all of these things defined, and we had to have people trained up in the requirements and expectations in order to maintain our compliance with these policies and procedures. The general manager acted like he didn't have to observe any of them. And there were many of them that he typically, if not frequently, violated and demanded the compliance of the chief compliance officer. That's probably not the best way to put that, but the cooperation of the chief compliance officer, who was also the internal legal counsel. We had requirements, for instance, on hiring people, the requirement to produce a job description, have it approved all the way through senior management, advertise it for open competition, get it salary graded, interview people with documentation of why someone was eliminated from a candidate pool and why the people who were retained for final interviews were retained, why the final selection was made, what those criteria were, and yet he wanted to go out and hire anybody that he wanted to just by snapping his finger. And he did it on a number of occasions. Also, material acquisitions, contracts. He wanted to circumvent most of our contract requirements and procurement requirements. If he wanted to hire a consultant, he didn't want to have to do a request for proposal and take bids or proposals from different companies. He wanted to go out and hire whoever he identified and circumvent that entire process. He did that on a number of occasions. A couple of them are actually mentioned in the book. So that's one thing that I think everyone in an organization should watch for, is whether or not that compliance message comes from the top, and if that person walks the talk. I mean, that's one way to recognize the type of dysfunction that we were going through, is if you have a leader who typically circumvents the types of things that you're expected to adhere to. So vigilance for that type of thing is one key. Dedicate yourself to making the most out of your own situation and career in that organization, so that you can achieve the most you can for the organization as a whole. So you want to make sure that what you do supports your organization to the best of your abilities. If you do that, the reality is you're not going to have much control over what a poor leader does. And really the only way that I think you have to respond to that are some of the things I just talked about, trying to get support for the recognition that you may need to address the top leadership in your organization, that support coming from your peers in the organization, from elected officials, from internal legal counsel should be very interested in the things that the CEO or general manager does. And if you can't get any support there, I think that's the dilemma. You need to decide whether or not you can actually stay in that type of environment, I wouldn't advise anyone to stay any longer than they actually can in order to preserve their mental health, their family situation. I was just committed to making the most of it and staying as long as I could, because I had almost 24 years there, and it didn't make any sense for me to let someone who did not have the best interest of that organization in mind force me out when I knew that I did.
So what ended up happening with him? So was he removed? Did he quit? And where did that sit along the same timeline of your case for wrongful dismissal?
I didn't make it obvious in the book. I think most of these things are mentioned, and so readers can probably draw their own conclusions. But by the time that they created circumstances where they thought they could terminate me and get away with it, there were a number of things building, a number of circumstances that he had created that were kind of creating the perfect storm as far as a change in leadership. There were the reform candidates for the commission that were actually campaigning on his leadership as an issue. Growing discontent in the community. One of the things that provides evidence of that is Dan McConnell's sketches in my book. Every time that his leadership, the organization, at his suggestion, did something that went against the company's mission, which is owned by the people that we serve, the public got pretty upset about it, and they started coming to commission meetings and demanding community forums, explanations for things that the utility was doing. The other big player in that was the local media, especially the newspaper, the Wenatchee World. They had through their responsibility to the community, had gotten involved in some things that put them in conflict with the general manager, and they had no positive feelings about that individual. And so, I won't say every opportunity they had to make him look bad, they took advantage of it, but they reported fairly and honestly on the things that he did, and none of them came out favorably for him. So you had that mechanism, people that buy ink by the barrel, letting everybody in the whole valley and in central Washington know that this fellow was not the most positive leader that the utility could have. And then there was my firing, the multi-million-dollar software project that was entirely too big for the organization and raised the eyebrows of everyone in the public, and eventually some of the commissioners, even some of the commissioners that he had in his pocket. All those things were just coming together to create the situation where, he realized that he was losing control, and that was his big thing. Of course, you've already recognized that he had to have control. He was a control freak, and he had to have control in order to be able to execute his strategy and the things that he was trying to maneuver. So he realized that his control was evaporating, things were changing. Those two reform candidates got elected in late 2004. So he lost two of his favored commission members that supported him in everything that he did. And he thought, well, this is a trend. This is just going to continue. I can't stay here. So I was let go at the summer of 2004. Those candidates were elected in November. They took office January 2005. And by, I think, October of 2005, he was gone to another job. So barely, 14 months after, less than that, after my termination, he was gone. And it's probably safe to say, I think we mentioned this in the book, that he'd been looking for 8-10 months, maybe even a year, when he saw the writing on the wall, and he found the right position and he left.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a note of hopefulness then, because psychopaths, as I mentioned at the beginning, are good at getting into power and terrible at maintaining it and hanging on to it because they often don't know how to galvanize the troops around them because they're so focused on control and being in charge. They don't know what it actually means to deliver results collectively. Great book. If you're keen to keep reading about this sort of thing, or whether you're kind of done and dusted, having lived through it all, is I've just finished reading it. It's called Corruptible. And it is about how different people gain power, how we give power, sometimes for the wrong reasons, and explains why psychopaths can easily, seems like they can get into power so easily. And most importantly, what we can do to avoid it happening. Some of the suggestions that you put out there in terms of monitoring, are people actually showing compliance, and what are the leaders actually doing? Are they acting on behalf of the other people? And be mindful of confidence, because confidence, we mistake confidence for competence often. And a psychopath is very good at manipulating people into getting people to believe that they are very competent, like the way that you described, that he creates drama only to come across as the person who saves the day is an example of that. So yeah, Corruptible. And I can't remember the author's name, but I'll make sure that it's in the show notes. It's a fascinating expose of different examples of power can be wielded and how different good people can be corrupted. Power does corrupt in certain circumstances, and sometimes the system that perpetuates it. In the situation that you were in, the system also perpetuates it, and you identified that as well, that elected officials don't necessarily have the background necessary to interrogate the leadership. And so they are hampered by their own lack of awareness and didn't necessarily respond to your expertise because they had none themselves. So it's a sorrowful tale, and one also that has a good news story at the end of it, so that the villain has his comeuppance at the end of the day, and you, through your tenacity and persistence, managed to get vindicated in your experience as well. But my goodness, what a long time to endure, and what a cost it took. And not everybody has the resilience or fortitude, as you say. The mental health cost of persisting in such a toxic environment can be extraordinary. And so now you have, 10 years after the fact, a book that goes through it all, that is a gift to others to see how good people can still strive and survive and get beyond these particular situations. So I love it as a clarion call, not a clarion call, but a warning call for people to be mindful of the kind of leadership that's around them. And that when we are focused on others, as you were in your job and role, to elevate others to work for the benefit of the organization and the community, then that is the thing that can ride ahead of the rest of the other stuff going on around us. Any final suggestions or recommendations for people listening in terms of how to live and work better?
Gosh. Well, I think just focusing on leadership in regard to that question, I think some of the more contemporary leadership philosophies have a lot of good lessons in them. I think Ken Blanchard's servant leadership in particular has a lot of components that anybody who is on the verge of assuming a leadership position wants to maximize their capability and the capability of anyone all the stakeholders that they may have purview over or responsibility for, or that they report to, should probably look at what they can accomplish by adopting servant leadership. I kind of wish it had been around back when I was a student and was trying to form my own approach to dealing with the situation that I was in, or even before that, to try to make the most out of myself and my department. I think we did a pretty good job of fitting into the description of more contemporary leadership philosophies. But that's one that I think people should look at. If people do pick up my book and read it, my intention was to try to provide not necessarily lessons, but material that elected officials could draw from to try to avoid the same situation happening in their organization. The same thing with general managers and leaders. If they don't want to be that person, which I hope they don't, to recognize the characteristics and whether or not in their own thinking processes that they have fallen into some of those traps, and to try to deal with it before it actually does damage to their organization. And then just to regular employees, as we discussed before, to help them recognize the emerging dysfunctions that sometimes pop up in companies and can happen anywhere. That's what I hope people would take away from my book. And I'd actually like to see more elected officials, more board members read it and provide me feedback, because I think they may be the best target audience.
I think that would be a great audience, actually. It's sort of like a warning to the elected officials who have governance of public entities in particular. I'm thinking about the councils that I work with here. So our local councils who are elected members who govern public service entities, and how important it is to be aware of some of these things, to be mindful of what's happening in the organizations that they have stewardship over. It's a valuable resource. It's an incredible tale told with, I think, quite a lot of equanimity. Like, I didn't get a sense of you had an axe to grind, which can be the case in these kinds of stories. You know, they did me wrong, I'll show them. It's not at all that story. It's a very rational, reasonable story about this is what happened, and these were the warning signs, and this is where we tried to make a difference, and this is where it went wrong, and this is where it ended up. And for that, I congratulate you, and I encourage people to pick the book up and have a read through, and to see what lessons they can take from it for their own situation. Gordon, thank you so much. This has been extraordinary. Thank you for coming on the show and sharing your story, and thank you for writing the book too.
Oh, well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity and for the feedback. I appreciate it and respect your opinion. So thanks again. This has been great.
That was such a fascinating story. The book is really interesting. It's called The Intrepid Brotherhood, Public Power, Corruption, and Whistleblowing in the Pacific Northwest by Gordon Graham. So if you've ever found yourself in a similar situation where you're trying to do the right thing and yet you're caught in a system or surrounded by leaders who don't listen, who are actively looking out for themselves, and you suspect are sociopaths, then this book will help. It will help you identify the warning signals of what's going wrong. So if you are also a council member or a board member and you're concerned about what's happening in the organization for which you have responsibility, this book is also useful for you. So the key takeaways for me were pay attention to leadership. Don't be afraid to ask hard questions, to explore nuance, to explore what accountability is looking like within an organization. And don't be afraid to speak up. And with that, there is always the question of how you present information. Do you throw something on the table and have it explode? And I call those poo bombs. How we deliver a message is as important as the message itself. And I think if we're delivering a message that is threatening to someone else, then we need to take a step back and really think about that. And think about how we can get people on board with the conversation instead of creating an enemy of them. Now, I asked Gordon specifically if he would have delivered the information in a different way. And to his point, he said, no, not really, because the person that he was dealing with was any suggestion that he do something differently, no matter how it was framed, would have created an enemy. So sometimes even our best framing, our best way of presenting information may not be well received because the person is so defensive, aggressive, control freaky, sociopathic, psychopathic. If we find ourselves face to face with one of those people, then we need to take action and really dig into that. So I think this book is sobering as much as it is inspiring. And I think the more that we look at examples of bad leadership, we need to also look at the courage of people to speak truth to power. And I think Gordon has done that extremely well in his book. And if you find yourself in the same situation, I hope you find the courage to speak truth to power and to make a difference where you see a difference needs to be made. If that's you and you want to learn how to be a better leader, this is my segue into Amplifiers, which is the sponsor of today's show. Amplifiers is our advanced leadership training program for senior leaders who want to make a big impact as well as drive big results. You'll find yourself in a company of like-minded people who are interested in figuring out how they can be better leaders, how they can make a better difference, and be aware of the pitfalls that they too may find themselves falling into from time to time. So if that's you, Sing out and have a look at our website at zoerouth.com. Click on programs, click on amplifiers. The information is all there. Or email me, zoe@zoerouth.com. I would love to hear from you. If you want to make a difference in the world, I'm here to support you. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.